I decided I had to do something in the world of nutrition when I heard a TED Talk by Jamie Oliver, where he said, in the next 17 minutes that I'm talking, so many people are going to be dead just by the food that they're eating. And that was about 20 years ago. And at that point, that was my call to action to say, okay, people are dying for a lack of knowledge and true knowledge, and I need to do what I can to be able to share what I've learned about this and what I continue to learn so that they can be empowered with the same knowledge. The very interesting thing about nutrition 20 years ago is that we were still operating under false data. What I think one of the greatest discoveries that have been made was several years ago, the University of California, San Francisco discovered that Harvard had 3 scientists who were paid off to falsify data, to say that sugar was safe and that fat was a problem. So we've had decades of misinformation, actually at least 5 decades by the time that they did that, for us to step back and go, wait a minute, we need to reconfigure the way we're looking at all of this. And even more importantly, I think what that taught us is that we have to question studies. We have to question authorities when it comes to this and make sure that it makes sense. Because just because an authority said that something is so doesn't mean that it's absolute truth. Everybody has blind spots. And being able to discover what those blind spots are in how we've been taught about nutrition has been one of the most fun pieces of becoming a nutritionist. So one of the greatest litmus tests to determine whether or not there's truth or not is looking at areas where people are healthy. And that's why I love always kind of taking the blue zones as one of my layers of discovery of truth. Recently, there was a gentleman, Dr. Gundry, who talked a lot about something called lectins that were the worst thing ever on the planet. But the problem with him saying that is that in the areas where people are the healthiest and have the lowest rates of obesity and lowest rates of cancer and heart disease, all the things that Americans suffer from, they are eating foods that are very rich in those lectins. So we have to look at what's real and what is being looked at under a microscope. And when you look at things holistically, you really start to see them in a different light. And so it's great to have population studies. It's great to have actual cultural knowledge that's been passed down to understand why things have become a part of a certain culture and how that impacts longevity and true health and healing. Okay, so one of the main reasons that we find ourselves in the precarious situation we are when it comes to health in general, why you have so many people suffering with so many diseases, is that we have separated ourselves from understanding nutrition like we used to. We used to have traditional senses of what foods to eat, and we've been marketed away by that by companies that are looking for foods that are going to make you happier and make this taste better, and the short-term understanding of what food will do for you versus understanding that food is truly what you're made of. I mean, I know when we've heard this, what you are, what you eat, but it couldn't be more true. And it's almost revolutionary now to say that all of your brain chemistry is made from food, and of course it is. But we have to reintroduce everybody to this understanding that all of the biochemistry that's attempted to be manipulated by medications and all of the problems that we're facing is derived from the food that we're eating. And if we don't get that biochemistry from the food, then we have very little that we can work with the medicine. So in summation, one of the greatest missteps we've made is trying to correct the results of malnutrition with chemical therapies, instead of addressing whether or not we can bring in the full chemistry set from the foods, as opposed to finding one chemical aspect of that and trying to make that replace all that's naturally occurring in food. And the exciting thing about nutrition is that it's still a young science in our understanding of everything that's in there. And so we have a great new frontier to fully embrace how we can take food and use that as true healing medicine. So when somebody says superfood to me, I get a little cautious and be very careful in how I have this conversation, because oftentimes we are led to believe that there's this wonderful specific thing that can only be found on the top of a mountain or at the bottom of the ocean and it's going to heal everything. And there's some really interesting theories about the way we exist in this planet, meaning the things that we need the most are most abundant to us. We would die the fastest without oxygen, so we have more abundant air. So to say that something is going to be super hard to get a hold of doesn't make sense. It doesn't even line up with evolution, right? How would that even be possible? So Superfoods, if you're looking for them, from my opinion, are those that are going to satisfy the enormous micronutrient need for a human, to really satisfy all biochemistry that's happening. And you're going to find that in foods, and you're going to find that in foods that haven't been refined. You're going to find them as they occur in nature. You often say that one of nature's best multivitamins is a pumpkin seed, but you want to make sure that it's raw and that if you sprout it, you get more of the nutrients out of it. My advice for somebody who's looking for a superfood is to first identify what foods you're eating that do contain nutrients, and try to have somebody who knows something about nutrition to see where your blind spots are. Often people get into a food rut, and so they think, okay, I'm eating this, and they're looking at macronutrients, they're counting calories, but that doesn't really say anything to all of the micronutrients that we need to have. Now, it gets even more exciting when we start looking about geography in the United States. We can be region specific for certain nutrients being available in the soil or not being available in the soil. Now, veterinarians have known this for a long time, because if you don't have a livestock that's going to be healthy enough to be able to get your investment on it, you're out of luck. So they've known that you have to have certain micronutrients to keep the livestock healthy. And hopefully we can start to convert that over to how we look at our own lives and what we're missing from what we're eating, and where is it coming from? Does it truly have what we hope it has in it? One of the things that happens as a nutritionist is people want you to give them a protocol for a condition. And the challenge to that, to lead from what I just spoke about from a geographical location, is there's so many variables that come into what makes up you as a chemistry set right now. And this is changing every day, every day, every day. For example, the standard American diet has a 20-to-1 ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. So what we really want is get that closer to a 1-to-1 ratio, because they balance each other out. And if you have somebody doing this diet every day, every day, every day, every day, the longer they've been doing it, the more you need to be able to undo that. And so you also have all these deficits in nutrients, and whether or not you are eating what your parents have been eating all these years and then you switch to a totally different diet, you need to know a lot about what's going on with that individual. I think one person put it really well when they said, we need a little bit of everything all the time, with an emphasis on your weakness. And so identifying what your weakness is really the key to being able to do that, as long as you are confident that you're satisfying what those weaknesses are. There's so many things that have to come into play, and you really need to understand where the person started. It really does start as to how they came into this world, because your microbiome is going to be greatly impacted by those very early years. You can learn a lot from the things that you had to do as a child or couldn't do as a child because of what you were or were not getting from your family and from the diet that you were getting. So in order to truly discover what's there, first of all, you have to closely examine what somebody is eating on a regular basis. Most important, those things that they do every day. And the things that they're missing every day are going to be, of course, very important. So I look at what are they getting too much of, and can we reduce that to balance it out? And what have they not been getting enough of? And make sure we can bring that up to the level that we need. And then the expectation piece has to be managed, because when it comes to nutrition, nature takes a little bit longer in its timetable than, say, people are used to these days. They think everything's instantaneous. In order to truly get your body satisfied all the way down to your toes, you can't do that in one meal. Sometimes you have to do it over 3 to 6 months even to totally satisfy the micronutrient needs. And while you're trying to address that deficit, your body's still doing business. So it still needs the 100% of what it needs to just be functioning that day, and then a little bit more sometimes to address the deficit that occurred over the decades. So it takes a lot of examining what you're eating, what you're not eating, really taking all the information that you can possibly get about this person's health, how they're sleeping, how their energy levels are, what times of day their energy levels are, whether or not they're getting pains and aches, or there's so many things to learn that can give you clues to help identify where you are in default for these balances. And it's an exciting, exciting science. All right, so I actually just had a conversation last weekend about the blood type, and there are, when you actually look into, this is where I talk about studying the studies, and when the gentleman who discovered that people were using this blood type, it was a professor who asked his students to do all the research on this and find what were the studies that they were citing to support this. And they found that most of the studies that were cited actually didn't line up with that. So we do have differences that we do need to pay attention to, and they can change, and they can change consistently. One thing that I always caution people about with looking at the DNA to determine their diet is that the DNA can change. That's how that polymorphism happened in the first place. There was some type of mutation in the gene. So these genes can constantly be in a state of changing, and we're starting to understand that there are multiple things that impact whether or not they're doing that. And then finally, the most important thing that I always want to remind people is that the genes do load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger, and that's what epigenetics are. So you can be very much impacting whether or not you're having genetic expression based on what you're bringing into the chemistry set to support a balance in that. I could get into very detail about methylation and genetic expression and acetylation, but your it's always doing this balancing act where it's inhaling and it's opening up its ability to have the genes expressed, and it's exhaling and closing them off to protect them. And all of that is going to be regulated by epigenetic factors. What kind of chemistry is in there to help keep that balance going? So again, to determine your diet based on your DNA, I think is a tiger by the tail. You can get into trouble. And there are people like Gary Brecka right now telling people because of genetic mutations, everybody should take something called a methylfolate. The problem with that is that after a few months, it overcorrects, and then you get the opposite problem because you're skipping steps. When you look at nature and how we bring in essentials, our body would be able to produce these things in its own balance. But when we skip these steps, we miss the deficits that we were not getting, and that's going to find a problem somewhere else and express itself in a different way. So we always want to look at making sure we get the essentials in, not skipping those and trying to chase this gene or that gene. And the other thing about that is that, yes, there are genes that can inhibit or slow down methylation, but you could have one gene that does that and you could have 5 others that do the opposite. So be very careful in having genetics be the thing that determines how you're going to live the rest of your life. And you have to be checking in. I always tell people check in about every 90 days because that's going to give you a full turnover of how your body's feeling. And don't stick with the same thing forever. I think there's seasons on the planet for a reason. I think every season is about 3 months, and you need to evaluate and change and modify how you're living in the environment that you're living. Okay, so my final piece of advice is to trust but verify any information and understand that there's a lot of marketing happening out there in this space. And the further something gets away from nature, the worse it's going to be for you. We are a part of nature, and the best we can do is to understand where can we get this nutrients from nature in its original state, not something that's been souped up or souped down or stripped out or changed. You want to have whole foods. And so eating a diet of meat and vegetables is going to be probably the best thing you can do in an appropriate amounts. And what I mean by that is not refined. So of course, when we have all these refined foods, there's all kinds of additives and derivatives, and they're fortified with this and fortified with that. When we start doing that, we start to create more problems long-term than we're solving short-term. So keep it whole and keep it real, and make sure that you're getting a variety of foods, changing it up regularly. Keep yourself out of a food rut, because that can get you into the weeds as well. So make sure you're being a little adventurous, trying a few different things, and eating things as close to the state that they came in nature as possible. Now, if there's one thing that I want to reach out to everybody about currently, right now, because in holistic healthcare, you tend to be a catch-all for everything. You tend to be the person who's letting everybody know that just because somebody told you there's nothing that can be done about it, we want to remind you that means that they've reached the end of their knowledge. Okay, so always keep looking for somebody who may know more about it, because there's more to learn, and we're constantly learning. Never accept somebody else's limitations on your health. No matter how educated you think they are, they have blind spots, and they've only come to where they are based on their experience so far. So always seek new answers. There's always something you can do to improve your health. It doesn't matter what your health condition is, there's something you can do to remove a stressor from your life and to add something that is going to support your health always. And specifically for mental health populations, this is really close to my heart. And I want to make sure people understand that there is a powerful connection, in fact, the most powerful connection between how you're feeling, your brain chemistry, and the food that you're bringing in to create that brain chemistry. The most powerful thing that impacts your brain chemistry is what you are bringing in to this chemistry set. And there's so much information out there that just has to be shared with the public about being able to support mental health populations with the appropriate nutrition. I believe that the more we can share that message, the quicker we can help impact so many people's lives and actually get them back to truly living and thriving as opposed to just surviving and getting through the day.